Hallelujah לעולם, Hallelujah ישירו כולם. במילה אחת בודדה, הלב מלא בהמון תודה. I am standing in front of the wall, the remaining wall of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was the wall that surrounded the area that was designated as the ghetto of Warsaw, where we had 2,700 apartments that were basically dungeons with 6 to 8 people in them, and were receiving a very small ration for food. And I lived on Mila 38, apartment 43, and on it, 1/8 of the apartment contained a coal and wood lumberyard that provided heating material for all the residents if it was available to the Jewish people in the ghetto. They had a stable and a horse that was used for bringing in the coal and some of the items that they were selling for the residents of the Warsaw Ghetto. Because of the shortage of food and other things, the youth became the backbone of the Warsaw Ghetto and risked their lives in smuggling. There were different types of smuggling, which some of them done. I was fortunate enough to be able to get out of the ghetto with materials that were manufactured in the ghetto on that wagon that was pulled by a beautiful horse that lived on Mila 38. The name of the horse was Lalka, and the wagon was built the way that it contained double bottoms, double sides, with certain crevices where items could be smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto to help with the food situation. This was not done every time the carriage went out and in, but it was done when something could be negotiated, and maybe some of the guards at a certain time of duty were bribable, so some transport could come in with some food that would not be authorized to be brought into the ghetto. And that was by the Germans. If you like to let me explain how this procedure worked. We were the smugglers, but we were not old enough to negotiate deals. Deals were negotiated by adults. Then we, on the wagons, would carry an envelope that contained either money or something with the explanation of a deal, and we would put it in a certain place that existed and was pre-marked for us. We would leave it there, and then we might pick up instructions of where to pick something up, or the original boxes that we were supposed to pick up at a certain place had names of items that were shipped into the ghetto that should be remanufactured or reproduced for other products. We would take these items, or somebody would take these items out and put the food into the boxes that were describing the materials. And that's how some of the smuggling was being done. We were always aware that we didn't know anything of what transaction we were transporting, because if we knew and were caught, then there'll be no more smuggling into the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, there were also times that we smuggled, and a lot of us had certain clothes that we wore for a long time, for the duration of the ghetto, and it was shreds. The hats that we might have had were like shreds. So if we were smugglers that ran through the gates and ran back, only when we knew that some of the Germans were a little bit easier of letting us go through than some of them that were really strict. You didn't want to be recognized too many times, so you couldn't run through like every day or every week, or sometimes it took a long period of time, so you wouldn't be recognizable that you were a smuggler, because sometimes you could walk and go through the gate because the guard looked the other way, but he was bribed. But then when you tried to come back, if it took you longer to be on the other side, then you had to run through it. So you went to the side and you waited, and then you tried to sneak in while he was looking the other way, and then start running. And the problem at the beginning, when they start running, they usually have a German, a Pole, and a Jewish couple. So sometimes, if you try to do it, they got the Jewish couple, they stood there, they got the Jewish couple to run after you. At 1942, the apartments were full of bodies. The bodies were I can't find the word now, but in a minute the bodies were laying there where the people did, and the smell was horrible. So if we were being chased by the German, all we had to do is run in to the apartment, lay down, close your eyes, and just lay there. The Germans would not, or even the capos, would not go in to try to catch us then, because the condition was horrible. Decomposing. The bodies were decomposing. I just had a senior moment. There were other ways of smuggling things in there. By sometimes there were details that we were going out as a group that was close, and that was at the beginning of the ghetto. And really by that time we were getting a little bit more food. The later it got, the worse it got. So if we went something like that, we sometimes was a Landwirtschaft group, where they went a few kilometers out next to a farmer, help him with his farm, digging and planting. But this wasn't too often, and sometimes we had to dig big ditches where they sometimes took a lot of people out and then did horrible things with them, and then we might have to cover up the gravesites. Now, I was about 14, and I had a nice posture, but if it was in an area where things were being sold, we could sneak into a store, or maybe behind it where there was a garbage bin, and sometimes were articles thrown away that were rotten or maybe not being consumable on a Gentile part. So we would grab them and coming back, bring them in. We had garments or coats with maybe 10 or 15 or 20 pockets on them in different sizes, to be able to put some things that were smaller into these garments. There was on the left side of the lumber yard or the coal yard a shed where there's some like 2x4s or whatever needed to be done. And if you looked at the roof, it was against the wall with an opening half the size of this. And then there was a building over here as big as this one. There was an iron fence with sticky things sticking up with slats. I would climb up on that fence, go over it, because the street next to Mila Street, parallel, was Muranovska. There was a bakery there, and I would climb over and get some bread, sometimes by confiscating it, otherwise known as stealing, or some irregular breads that were being consumed, but sometimes by the people that were the bakers, and they could take them for their family. If I got a hold of something like that, my little brother would stay in the coal yard and maybe sometimes get on the roof. But if he wasn't staying there and I went over there by myself, I would throw him over far enough so it would either fall on the roof or on the ground, and then climb back and pick up my loot and take it home.
That's a wrap.
I confessed. I go to the priest.
What?
I go to the priest. You know,